had everything: a loyal wife, beautiful kids, and a life I thought was perfect. But one ordinary day, a single revelation shattered it all, and what I uncovered next was worse than I could have ever imagined. That morning started off like any other, a perfect routine, a moment of peace before the chaos. I woke up at 5:30 sharp, laced up my running shoes and headed to the gym. After an intense weightlifting session, I took to the track for a 3-mile run. The fog was thick, rolling over the empty field like a blanket, and for a while, it was just me, my footsteps, and the steady rhythm of my breathing. Once I hit my mark, I cooled down with an extra 2 miles, alternating between sprinting the straights and walking the curves. By the time I got home, I was dripping with sweat, but a hot shower washed away the exhaustion. When I stepped out, dressed and ready for the day, Sarah was already in the kitchen waiting for me. On the counter sat a blueberry muffin and a tall glass of chocolate milk, just the way I liked it. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her in close as I downed the milk in one gulp. She groaned, complaining that I'd wrinkle her blouse and smudge her lipstick, but within seconds, I felt her melt against me. Even after all these years, she still made my heart race. At 31, she was more stunning than ever. Her once golden hair had lightened over the years, now cascading down to her lower back in nearly platinum waves. She wasn't tall, barely 5 feet 1 inch, but she was proof that the best things came in small packages. Sarah was on fire in her career, climbing the ranks at her law firm at an impressive speed. After handling several high-profile corporate accounts, she was well on her way to making partner. The firm had taken notice and so had the industry. She was earning almost as much as I was, which was saying something considering I had just been promoted, again. 5 promotions in, I was now heading the architectural department of a major engineering and design firm, a position I had worked years to earn. I kissed her one more time, grabbed my briefcase and muffin, and headed for the door. "Have a great day, gorgeous," I called over my shoulder. She smiled, tossing a playful kiss my way before turning her attention to getting the girls ready for school. She usually went to work an hour after I did, which meant bedtime duty was mine, a job I never minded. My other baby, however, was waiting for me in the garage. I had only owned her for about 6 months, but every time I saw that burnt orange Charger Hellcat, I felt like a kid again. I had been a Charger guy since I was 16 thanks to my dad who had helped me buy my first one, a 68 RT still parked under the shed out back. Every now and then, I took it for a spin just to hear the growl of that old Hemi roaring through the Flowmaster pipes. Of course, it didn't compare to the monster I was driving now. Just 2 days ago, one of the engineers in my office had been bragging about his brand new Shelby GT350, going on about its 500 horsepower engine, hoping to impress Maria from the next office over. I had just smiled, keeping my own little secret. He had no idea the Hellcat was pushing over 700. I had a soft spot for all the new pony cars. The Mustangs, the Camaros, they were fun, no doubt. But let's be real, they weren't in the same league as the Hellcat. The Charger and Challenger were in a different universe entirely. I've always believed that hot rod owners are their own breed, a group of people who respect the craft, the history, and the sheer power of American muscle. By the time I got home that evening, my girls were already buzzing with excitement, talking over each other in their rush to tell me about their day. School had just started the week before, and they were still in that honeymoon phase where everything was exciting and new. Their teacher, Miss Brooks, had apparently won them over completely. She was new to the district, and though I hadn't met her yet, she had clearly made an impression. I sat back, grinning like an idiot as I listened, watching them giggle and stuff their faces with chocolate chip cookies and tall glasses of milk. To me they were perfect, my little angels who could do no wrong. Each of them happily polished off 3 cookies before heading upstairs to work on their homework. A few minutes later, I heard soft footsteps in the hallway, and Sarah's voice floated into the kitchen. "What's for dinner?" Before I could answer, the girls darted out of their rooms, tackling her with hugs. She laughed, ruffling their hair as they ran back to their desks. Then she came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my neck and leaning in to nibble on my ear. "I'm going to grab a quick shower," she murmured. While she was upstairs, I finished up math homework with the kids, then made them an offer I knew they wouldn't refuse. "How about incredible pizza tonight?" They practically exploded with excitement, running off to change into shorts and t-shirts while I went to start the car. But something was gnawing at me. Sarah's car was still at her office, so I had to take the more inconspicuous one, our smaller SUV. It looked like every other boxy crossover on the road, which was exactly what I wanted. At 2:30, I watched from across the street as Sarah walked out of her building and slid into her BMW. I followed at a careful distance as she drove out into the suburbs. At first, I told myself I was just being paranoid, that maybe she had some errand to run before dinner. But then she made a turn that made my stomach drop. I knew exactly where we were going. This neighborhood belonged to my brother, Mark. Except I don't have a brother. A cold wave of realization hit me. Something wasn't right. I pulled up just far enough away to keep out of sight, my heart pounding as I watched her park in the driveway of a house I had never seen before. The longer I sat there, the more uneasy I felt. And then, through the cracked open window, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. "You can talk him into it," a man's voice said. "We've both seen the way he looks at Chloe." "Don't back out now," Sarah replied. "We've already talked about this a dozen times. You know you want to." "Yes, I've loved it, but I don't want to lose everything." I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The next words were muffled, but I caught enough to piece together what they were saying. "If he sleeps with Chloe, he can't say anything. We just swap every now and then. You might as well admit it now that you're here. I can tell you want it." "Yes, but not that bad. If he ever found out about this, it would kill him." I felt sick. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just heard. Sarah. My Sarah. The woman I had built a life with. And this is what she was doing? A part of me wanted to burst through that door and demand answers. Another part of me wanted to disappear, to pretend I hadn't heard any of it. Instead, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath as my world collapsed around me. I've always had a soft spot for the new pony cars, the Mustangs, the Camaros, even the newer Corvettes. They were fun, had their charm. But let's be honest, they weren't even in the same league as the Hellcat. The Charger and Challenger played a different game, one where raw power and unfiltered muscle ruled. Hot rod owners were a different breed, people who respected the craft, the history, and the pure adrenaline rush that came with it. And I got along with them just fine because, in the end, we all had our favorites. By the time I got home that evening, the house was filled with the happy chatter of my girls, their voices overlapping as they tried to outdo each other in telling me about their day. School had just started back up, and they were still caught up in the excitement of new classrooms, new friends, and, most importantly, their new teacher, Miss Brooks. She was fresh to the district, and though I hadn't met her yet, she had clearly left an impression on my daughters. I sat at the kitchen counter, watching them dunk chocolate chip cookies into tall glasses of milk, a stupid grin plastered across my face. To me they were perfect. My angels. They could do no wrong. Each one happily devoured 3 cookies before heading upstairs to tackle their homework. A few minutes later, I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Sarah appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. "What's for dinner?" she asked, her voice warm. Before I could answer, the girls ran back, launching themselves at her with excited hugs. She laughed, kissing the tops of their heads before sending them back to their books. Then she walked up behind me, wrapped her arms around my neck, and leaned in close. "I'm going to grab a quick shower," she murmured, her breath warm against my ear before she nibbled it playfully. While she was upstairs, I finished helping the girls with their math, then threw out an idea I knew they wouldn't refuse. "How about incredible pizza tonight?" They practically exploded with excitement, scrambling to their rooms to change into shorts and t-shirts. By the time they came barreling downstairs, I was already waiting in the car. But something was gnawing at me. Sarah's car was still at the office, so I had to take our smaller SUV, the one that looked like every other little box-shaped car on the road. The kind that blended in. That's exactly what I wanted. At 2:30, I was parked across the street, my windows tinted dark enough that no one could see me. I watched as Sarah walked out of her building and slid into her BMW. I followed, keeping my distance. She took a route I knew well, weaving through the city before heading toward the suburbs. My stomach knotted as I watched her turn into a familiar subdivision. Mark lived here. Except, I don't have a brother. A cold wave of realization hit me. Something wasn't right. I pulled over just far enough away to stay hidden, gripping the steering wheel as I watched her park in the driveway of a house I didn't recognize. A few moments passed, and then, through a slightly cracked window, I heard voices. "You can talk him into it," a man's voice said, low and casual. "We've seen the way he looks at Chloe." "Don't back out now," Sarah replied. "We've talked about this a dozen times. You know you want to." "Yeah, I've loved it, but I don't want to lose everything." My blood ran cold. The rest of the conversation was muffled, but I caught enough to piece together the meaning. "If he sleeps with Chloe, he can't say anything. We just swap every now and then. You might as well admit it now that you're here. I can tell you want it." "Yes, but not that bad. If he ever found out about this, it would kill him." I felt sick. Sarah. My Sarah. The woman I had built a life with. And this was what she was doing? A part of me wanted to kick the door down, to demand answers, to make them see what they had done. Another part of me wanted to drive away and pretend I had never heard any of it. Instead, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the house as my world unraveled piece by piece. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My voice was low, cold, and filled with more anger than I had ever felt in my life. "If that piece of garbage is in my house when I get home, I swear I'll tear him apart," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "And if I see you there, Chloe, I'll slap you all the way out the door. Don't ever let me see you or hear your voice again." I took a deep breath, my pulse pounding in my ears. "You tell that idiot that if he ever sees me, he better start running." I ended the call without waiting for a response. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was my dad. "Sheldon, what's going on?" he asked, concern thick in his voice. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My entire world had just been ripped apart. The woman I had loved, the one I would have given my life for, had betrayed me in a way I never thought possible. And our daughters, our little girls. What had they ever done to deserve this? "Sheldon, go home and talk to her," Maria, a close friend, urged. "Find out the answers to the questions that are eating you up inside. You'll never have peace until you do." I shook my head, the weight of it all pressing down on me. "I can't, Maria. I don't even know what I'd say." "Just go," she insisted, pulling me into a hug. I sighed. "Thanks, Maria. You're a good friend. Please don't tell anyone about this." She looked hurt, stepping back. "Jesus, Sheldon, how could you even say that? You know I'd never tell." I realized how much I had just insulted her trust. "I'm sorry," I murmured. She hugged me again. "I know you're upset. Just go home." So I did. The confrontation. When I walked in, Sarah was already sitting in the living room, her face pale, eyes red and swollen. She had been crying. The moment she saw me, she broke down completely, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "I'm so sorry, Sheldon," she gasped. "I made a terrible mistake. I never thought you'd find out." I felt nothing. No sympathy. No sadness. Just emptiness. "I love you so much," she choked out. I let out a bitter laugh. "Your love stinks like rotting tuna," I said flatly. "Try talking about something that makes sense." "Don't be like that," she begged, reaching for me. "It sounds cheap and dirty because it is cheap and dirty," I snapped. "You can't dress it up and put a ribbon on it, Sarah. That's what you were doing. And you know what? You would have gone through with it today if I hadn't caught you." She flinched, but I didn't care. "I never intended for this to happen," she pleaded. "Slap me, punish me, do whatever you want, just please forgive me." My jaw tightened. "You never thought I'd find out, did you?" She looked down. "I didn't think about how much this would hurt you until I thought you knew," she admitted, tears still streaming down her face. "When you left last night with the girls, I knew something was wrong. And then when you wouldn't even sleep in our bed, I just knew you had found out. I wanted to tell you to apologize, but you wouldn't let me in." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "I got up early so I could talk to you," she continued, voice trembling, "to beg you to forgive me. But you left before I could." She reached out for me again, but I stepped back. "I promise," she whispered desperately, "I'll make this right." I let out a hollow laugh. "You can't promise me anything, Sarah. Don't you dare make promises to me." Her whole body sagged. "You already threw away the only promise that mattered." She squeezed her eyes shut as if my words physically hurt her. "I know," she whispered. "I did forget." Silence stretched between us. "Can we talk again later? After the girls go to bed?" she asked softly. I took a long breath. "Yeah, we'll talk later." Then I turned for the door. "Where are you going?" she asked weakly. "To pick up the girls," I muttered. I was 10 minutes late when I pulled up to the school. As I rolled to a stop, I spotted them sitting on a bench in front of the building. And beside them was a woman whose assets made it almost impossible to focus on her face. I forced my mind back to what mattered. My girls. My daughters. The only pure thing I had left. As I stood there, I couldn't help but notice the way her figure moved, graceful yet distracting. She must have caught my momentary confusion because, I swear, 2 little bumps appeared at the peaks of those curves. She tilted her head slightly and smiled. "Carly," she corrected me. "Sheldon, do you think we could talk for a minute?" I glanced over at my daughters. "Girls, could you wait in the car for a second?" They nodded, hugging their teacher before skipping off to the car, holding hands like they always did. Carly watched them fondly, smiling after them before turning back to me. "I hope you're okay," she said. I forced a small smile. "We're getting through it." When we got back home, Sarah was still in the bathroom. The girls were still chattering away, mostly about how they were supposed to help her at a 5K event that Saturday. I sighed. "I'll work it with you instead," I told them. Their eyes lit up. "Really? Really?" I nodded. They ran off, happy again, and a little while later, Sarah called them. They talked for a long time, and at 8 o'clock she sent me a text. All it said was, "I'm so sorry." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a storm of emotions swirl inside me. An unexpected visitor. I took Friday off knowing I needed the space. Around midday my phone rang. It was Sophie, Sarah's little sister. She wanted to come over and talk. I had always had a soft spot for Sophie, so I agreed. When I opened the door, her face was tense, her expression a mix of anger and something else I couldn't quite place. "Why did you throw her out of the house?" she demanded the second she stepped inside. I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice steady. "Did she tell you why? We haven't seen her. Why don't you tell us?" I shook my head. "Listen, Sophie. I love you and I respect you, but I'm not telling you anything. If you want answers, ask her. And in the meantime, maybe you should do some fact-checking before you decide who to be disappointed in." Her anger wavered for a moment. "You're welcome here anytime," I added, "and you can see the girls whenever you want. But don't come back here to have this conversation with me again. Get the full story first, then we'll talk." She left without another word. The unexpected encounter. Later that evening, I stopped to fill up my tank at the gas station. I wasn't really paying attention until I heard the rumble of a pretty sweet-sounding engine pull up at the pump next to mine. I didn't think much of it, until I heard a familiar voice call out, "Sheldon? Is that you?" I turned, and the moment I saw her, my chest tightened. Of all the people to run into today, it had to be her. I glanced over my shoulder, and there it was, a bright yellow Mustang sitting at the pump. Carly Brooks was stepping out, her blonde hair catching the glow of the overhead lights. She walked toward me, casual but confident, wearing a button-up shirt tucked into a pair of fitted jeans. White flip-flops adorned her feet, and I couldn't help but notice that her toenails were painted the exact same shade as her car. She looked incredible. I smirked. "Miss Brooks, shouldn't you be teaching my daughters how to conjugate verbs instead of hanging around gas stations?" She grinned. "Even teachers need a break." As she got closer, her expression shifted. "You okay?" I let out a breath, shaking my head. "Just thinking." "Thinking hard enough that you needed a shot of whiskey?" she asked, glancing at the empty glass next to me. I huffed a small laugh. "It helps me think." Carly hesitated, studying me for a moment. "I'm not trying to pry, but you look like someone who could use a person to talk to." Her words caught me off guard. I changed the subject. "Are you married?" She shook her head. "No." I raised an eyebrow. "Ever been?" "I was engaged once," she admitted. "Mind if I ask what happened?" She paused, sipping her latte as she gathered her thoughts. Then, suddenly she shook her head. "I can't do this," she murmured. "Carly." "I'm sorry, Sheldon. I need to go." Before I could say anything else, she stood up. In the dim light, I could see the tears streaking down her high cheekbones. Then just like that, she walked away. The 5K event. The next morning, I was setting up for the 5K event, lining up rows of water bottles and Gatorades on a small table near the course. The runners would grab them as they passed, and I was supposed to have a second volunteer helping me. But they hadn't shown up yet. I could hear a car approaching in the distance, the unmistakable low rumble of a tuned engine. The thick tree line blocked the road, so I couldn't see it just yet. Then, as it rounded the curve, I nearly dropped the case of bottled water in my hands. That same yellow Mustang. Carly stepped out, and I swear the air around her shifted. She was wearing a pair of yellow boy shorts and a snug t-shirt that did little to hide her athletic figure. The sun caught her hair just right, making her look like she belonged on the cover of some fitness magazine. She walked up to the table, giving me a small smile. "Figured you could use some help." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by a deep, arrogant laugh from a few feet away. I turned, and immediately wished I hadn't. Some cocky, overinflated idiot was standing there, smirking like he owned the world. His eyes weren't on me though. They were locked onto Carly, full of entitlement, as if he couldn't fathom a woman not dropping to her knees in front of him. Then his lips curled into a sneer. "Your wife sure didn't complain when I was licking her," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Matter of fact, she told me my tongue was bigger than your—" I didn't even let him finish. The girls nearby gasped as he started to raise his hand like he was about to punctuate his disgusting remark with a shove or a punch. But then I stood up. And that's when I saw the flicker of doubt cross his face. He probably outweighed me by 20 pounds and had a decade on me. But the thing about bullies? They only like fights they're sure they can win. And something in my posture, maybe the way I was already tensing, ready to take him apart, made him hesitate. Without another word, he stepped back, muttering something under his breath before slinking off to his truck. Carly exhaled sharply. "Sheldon, I'm so sorry," she said, voice tight with frustration. "I shouldn't have let that happen." I held up a hand. "Not your fault." She hesitated, then moved forward like she was about to hug me. I stepped back. "Don't." She flinched, nodding slightly. The breaking point. Later that night, I sat across from Sarah at the kitchen table. She was a mess, eyes swollen, makeup smeared. "I swear to God," I said, my voice low and deadly, "if you touch me, I'm going to puke on you." She immediately burst into fresh sobs and sank into the chair across from me. "Can I just talk?" she begged, her voice shaking. "Please, Sheldon. Let me just say what I need to say." I crossed my arms, staring at her. She dropped her gaze to the floor, took a deep breath and whispered, "I don't even know where to start." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I know what Sophie said." I exhaled slowly, my jaw clenched. "So, you finally decided to come clean?" She sniffled, nodding. "I didn't want to tell you before. I thought you'd hate me." "Go on." She swallowed hard, eyes red and puffy from crying. "That night, at the reunion, I was drunk. Really drunk. And he asked me to dance. He was as charming and handsome as ever, and he kept telling me how amazing I looked, how much he missed me. He kept reminiscing about how good things were back in school, and she squeezed her eyes shut. I let myself get caught up in it. I let him pull me outside onto the back porch. God, Sheldon, it was so stupid. I didn't move. Didn't speak." Sarah took a shaky breath. "I was feeling vulnerable. He kissed me and I gave him oral sex." She let out a choked sob, covering her mouth as if she was trying to stop the words from coming out. I felt disgusted with myself afterward. I couldn't believe I had become the kind of person who would do something like that. I let him touch me. I let it happen. And I will regret it for the rest of my life. I still said nothing. Her hands trembled as she wiped at her face. "I see what I've done. I see how my stupidity has damaged us and our family. I don't want anyone else, Sheldon. Just you. I got caught up in memories in the past and I lost sight of everything that really mattered. You're an amazing lover. You always have been. But I was too busy romanticizing something that wasn't real. And now, I just want to fix this. I don't know how, but I want to fix it." She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. "What do you want to do? Do you still love me?" I inhaled sharply. That was the problem. I did still love her. But now I wasn't sure if she had ever truly loved me. "I don't believe anything you say anymore, Sarah," I admitted, my voice hollow. "No, I'm sure of it. I have to assume everything you've ever told me was a lie." "It wasn't," she sobbed, shaking her head violently. "I love you. I love you and only you. I don't want a divorce, Sheldon. Please. Why do you want to divorce me? I told you, I'll do anything." I closed my eyes for a brief second, trying to push back the storm inside me. "But you won't even step up and accept how badly you've messed up," I said, my voice rising. "You're trying to make excuses, trying to minimize what you did like it was nothing." "That's not true," she protested. "I see how badly this has hurt you. And I'm sorry. I just need you to understand, it didn't mean anything to me. It was a mistake. You're my man, Sheldon. Only you." I let out a bitter laugh. "So you were willing to throw away our entire marriage for something that meant nothing?" Sarah broke. Her sobs became uncontrollable and she could barely get her words out. "Thank you for even talking to me, Sheldon. I don't deserve that. I don't deserve you. You're a good man and I've taken advantage of you." I didn't respond. She wiped at her eyes again. "I'm dying inside being apart from my family." I leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with her. "Maybe you should have thought of that before." Silence. I took a deep breath, letting the moment settle. "I'm not going to keep tearing you down, Sarah. I'm done with that. But you need help. You need to talk to someone, a pastor, a counselor, someone who can help you figure out why your moral compass is so broken." She nodded frantically. "I will. I'll do anything. Please, Sheldon, just don't give up on me." I didn't answer. She finally got up and left. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment of our marriage, every time I had trusted her, every promise she had ever made. I could hear my daughter's soft breathing from the next room. I closed my eyes. At least I still had them. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "We both love you with all our hearts," my sister said gently. Just give us a chance to help you through this, okay? I hesitated but eventually nodded. Reluctantly, I agreed to sit down and talk with them. Later that afternoon, I called Sarah and asked to meet for lunch. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red and her face was drawn with exhaustion. The moment we sat down, she clung to the edge of the table, searching my expression for any sign of hope. I need space, Sarah, I told her, my voice firm. Her lip trembled. Sheldon, please. I get angry every time I look at you, I interrupted. You need to stay away from me. She flinched like I had struck her. I exhaled sharply, pressing my fingers to my temple. I've thought about this a lot, and I've decided, I can never forget what you did. You've shattered everything. And whether you realize it or not, you may have cost me any relationship I have left with my family. Tears slipped down her cheeks. No, please. Don't say that. We can fix this. I'm divorcing you, Sarah. Her entire body stiffened, her breathing coming in sharp, shallow gasps. For a moment she looked like she might collapse right there in the restaurant. But I had nothing left to give her. Facing the past. That evening I found myself sitting with someone who, strangely enough, understood exactly what I was going through. Carly Brooks. She had never gone back to her hometown, cutting off contact with the people she once knew. Instead, she had settled here in the same town as me, quietly building a new life as a teacher at my daughter's school. As I told her everything, about Sarah, about the betrayal, about the unbearable weight pressing on my chest, her eyes filled with tears. Mine weren't exactly dry either. She leaned over, resting her head on my shoulder. Her wild, curly hair brushed against my face, and for the first time in days, I felt something other than rage. Comfort. Understanding. Carly reached for my hand, her fingers warm and steady. She didn't say anything, just sat there with me, letting the silence do the talking. A family intervention. I should have known my family wasn't going to let me go through this alone. When I walked through my parents' front door later that week, I barely had time to react before my dad stood in front of me, gripping a baseball bat. We're not letting you tear this family apart with your stubbornness, he barked. Behind him, my sisters, Gail and Helen, grabbed my arms and practically dragged me toward the couch. Well, I muttered, this is going to be interesting. I barely had time to settle before the last people I wanted to see marched out of the back room. Sarah, her affair partner, and Chloe. I stiffened, my jaw locking as I glanced at my mother. He's your brother, she said softly. She's your wife. Chloe is your sister-in-law. I stared at her, my stomach churning. We can move past this, my mother continued. We're family. My laugh was bitter. Not anymore. I turned back toward the cheaters. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. And just so we're clear, the restraining order? It's going to be for you too. Sarah sobbed, but I ignored her. Then I turned to my former brother. You're mentally unstable, and I will never leave my girls alone with you. Helen quietly went upstairs and brought the twins down. They looked at everyone in confusion but didn't ask questions. I took their hands and led them outside, walking down the driveway without a second glance. Do you want to drive? I asked, tossing the keys to Gail. Her eyes widened. Really, Shell? I nodded. She grinned, practically bouncing on her heels. I always wanted to drive your car. At least one of us was having a good night. An unspoken promise. Carly had a softness to her, a quiet strength that nearly drove me wild. As we stood in the doorway, she hesitated, searching my face as if trying to figure out what I was thinking. Whatever she saw must have reassured her because she leaned in again, resting her head against my shoulder. I won't be with you until you're not with her, she whispered. I nodded. I understand. She pulled back slightly, her hazel eyes locking onto mine. I'm not Sarah Sheldon. And I won't become her either. I let out a deep breath. It's going to take a while to resolve all this. Carly smiled softly. I've got the rest of my life. Then, before I could say anything else, she kissed me. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself believe in something again. The next step was putting everything in motion. I met with my lawyer, signed what felt like 1,000 documents, and paid the retainer. She assured me she'd have the restraining order in place that afternoon and would get the divorce proceedings started immediately. 3 days later, my ex's family got hit with charges, unlawful restraint and terroristic threats. And as for him, the so-called man Sarah had thrown everything away for, he got slapped with an attempted assault charge. Finding a new normal. The next morning, Sarah came over to see the girls. She was quiet, her movements hesitant, as if unsure if she even belonged there anymore. The moment she saw them, her face crumpled and tears filled her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, pulling them close. "I love you both so much." They cried a little too, telling her how much they missed her. I made breakfast for all of us, and for the first time in a long while, we sat around the kitchen island, eating together like a normal family. Sarah promised them, and me, that she would still be their mom just like before, even though she wouldn't be living with us. The girls seemed to understand, agreeing to stay with her every other weekend. I told her she was welcome to come by any time during the week if she wanted to. After breakfast, the girls ran off to watch TV, leaving Sarah and me alone at the table. She looked at me carefully. "Sheldon, I love you." I let out a slow breath. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me yet," she continued. I hope someday we can be okay." I met her gaze. "I'm still mad. But I'll get over it." She nodded, a small, sad smile crossing her face. Then she left. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I didn't feel like my heart was breaking watching her walk away. Settling into a routine. As the weeks passed, things started to fall into place. Sarah came over on Mondays and Wednesdays to see the girls. On Fridays, I let them go out to dinner with her. Slowly, we found a rhythm, something that felt normal again. Then one afternoon, my lawyer, Marcy Gray, called. "The lawyer representing your ex's family wants to set up a meeting," she said. I immediately refused. "Sheldon," Marcy sighed, "it's in everyone's best interest. Just hear them out." I agreed, but on one condition. That man would not be there. Everyone accepted, and so I found myself sitting across from the very people who had destroyed my trust. "You have no idea what I put up with from him growing up," I told Marcy at one point. "He stole my toys, caused me more trouble than you can ever imagine, and because he was the baby of the family, no one ever held him accountable." I let out a bitter laugh. "And now? He screwed my wife, and they're acting like I'm the one being difficult." Marcy didn't argue. She simply nodded. "I don't blame you." The divorce was finalized 60 days later. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. I leaned back in my chair. "Move on. Moving forward." The Saturday after the divorce was official, Sarah had the girls, so I took Carly out for the first time. We drove up to the mountains for a local celebration, spending the evening wandering through vendor stalls and listening to live music. The air was crisp, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than anger or exhaustion. I felt happy. When we got home, the girls were still awake, bouncing with excitement. Then Amber blurted out, "Can we call you Mother?" Carly's breath hitched and she dropped to her knees, pulling them both into a tight hug. "Thank you, girls," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It would be an honor. I've loved you since the day I met you." She pulled back slightly, looking at them both seriously. "I'm not trying to take your mom's place. But I would be proud to be a mother to two angels like you." Tears welled in my eyes as I watched them squeeze her back, their faces lighting up with joy. For the first time in what felt like forever, everything felt right.